Washington.
This is a Tech Policy Leaders Encore episode originally recorded on January 17, 2017.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at washingtech.com/book. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player.
Moving the needle. Welcome to the Washington Policy Podcast.
Curating communications, media, and tech policy news so you don't have to. News, interviews, everything you need without the axe to grind. It's the Washington Tech Policy Podcast with Joe Miller.
Donald Trump names Rudy Giuliani as a cybersecurity advisor. Congress pressures Backpage to shut down its adult listings. And Tiffany Cross is my guest. Donald Trump named former New York City mayor and early Trump supporter Rudy Giuliani as an informal cybersecurity advisor. He'll head the president-elect's cybersecurity working group. Abby Phillip in the Washington Post writes that since leaving the New York City mayorship, Giuliani has started his own cybersecurity consulting firm, Giuliani Partners. Now a bunch of people are saying, what the hell does Giuliani know about cybersecurity? Well, Motherboard's Jason Kobler and Lorenzo Franceschi Bicchirai looked into it and found some folks familiar with the Giuliani and Partners work. It turns out their expertise is more along the lines of telling companies how to legally cover their asses if they're the victim of a cyber breach, as opposed to advising on actual cybersecurity solutions. So it's looking like this job is more of a thank you to Rudy Giuliani for his help during the campaign. It also turns out, as Bob Price at Business Insider found, that Giuliani's company website, GiulianiSecurity.com, is replete with vulnerabilities. You've heard all about the British spy who compiled Trump's dossier, people calling Trump POTUS and things like that on Twitter, so we won't get in all the details on that, especially since the dossier is still largely unsubstantiated. But Scott Shane put together a nice summary just in case you don't want to sit there all day trying to figure out what's going on with this. Basically, this all started when the Republicans retained a company called Fusion GPS to look into Trump to figure out how to hurt him politically. Then when it turned out he was going to be the Republican nominee, the Clinton campaign took over and retained Fusion to continue the investigation. The dossier has been floating around Washington for quite some time, but the president and president-elect were briefed on it, and that's when it made its way to the public via BuzzFeed and other sites. Mr. Trump says the entire dossier is a total fabrication. But if it's a total fabrication, it's pretty detailed, so someone must have had a lot of time on their hands. In any case, the FBI is investigating the claims, although no one knows if Trump will authorize that investigation to continue. Some are still wondering why FBI Director James Comey was so interested in Hillary Clinton's email, but not this. So this issue isn't going away anytime soon, basically, is the takeaway here. Matt Hamilton at the LA Times reports that Backpage, the classified ad website, shut down its adult section last week after the U.S. Senate released a scathing report accusing the company of hiding targeted search terms related to prostitution and child abuse. Backpage founders Michael Lacey and James Larkin were scheduled to testify before the Senate Committee on Homeland and Governmental Affairs Subcommittee on Investigations. The committee's report alleges that its review of some 1.1 million documents revealed evidence that the company facilitated sex trafficking and child abuse. Testimony from a Backpage site moderator seems to show the company actively removed search terms so they wouldn't lose ad revenue, but still keep the ads posted without actively promoting crimes. But Backpage says it adheres to the Communications Decency Act, which provides immunity to websites that host content by third parties. The company also claimed the government investigation was in violation of Backpage's First Amendment rights. One children's advocate, Lois Lee, founder of Children of the Night, even said the site has actually helped law enforcement identify predators and locate missing children. But Senators Bob Portman, the Republican from Ohio, and Democratic Missouri Senator Claire McCaskill, both who led the bipartisan investigation, say Backpage's decision to shut down the adult section shows how damning the evidence they uncovered was. Congress has selected its leadership for its communications and tech-related committees. Senate Commerce Committee Chair John Thune announced that Mississippi Republican Senator Roger Wicker will lead the Senate Subcommittee on Communications, Technology, Innovation, and the Internet. House Energy and Commerce Committee Chair Greg Walden announced Tennessee Republican Marsha Blackburn, who opposes net neutrality and prevented efforts to build municipal broadband networks, will lead the House Communications and Technology Subcommittee. John Brodkin reports in Ars Technica. Aaron Smith at Pew reports that a record number of Americans have smartphones and access to broadband at home. 77% of Americans have smartphones, with explosive growth among adults over 50. Americans with access to broadband at home increased 6 points to 73%. Also, 70% of Americans use social media and half own a tablet. iPhone app purchasers may sue Apple for not allowing them to purchase apps outside of the Apple Store, according to the Ninth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals, overturning the lower court's ruling. The decision doesn't affect the merits of the case brought against Apple, but if the plaintiffs win, it could open the door for more competition in the app market. Stephen Nels and David Levine have the story in Reuters. The independent prosecutor in South Korea investigating the corruption scandal that has led to the suspension of the country's first female president, Park Geun-hye, has asked a local court to issue an arrest warrant for Lee Jae-young, the head of Samsung. The prosecutors allege Lee used corporate money to bribe Park for favors. The court is expected to review the request on Wednesday. Anna Fifield has more in the Washington Post. Finally, the Email Privacy Act is alive again after passing unanimously in the House and dying in the Senate last year. The bill would require authorities to get warrants for emails as well as social media data, including data older than 180 days. It would also allow providers to notify their customers that their information was requested. The bill was introduced by Representative Kevin Yoder from Kansas, Republican, and Jared Polis, the Democrat from Colorado. John Egerton has a story in multi-channel news. Stay with us. For Washington Tech Policy Podcast listeners, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. You can listen at the gym, in the car, or on your morning run. How about The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver?
Consider even an Africa unconquered altogether. Imagine those first Portuguese adventurers approaching the shore, spying on the jungle's edge through their fitted brass lenses. Imagine that by some miracle of dread or reverence, they lowered their spyglasses, turned, set their riggings, sailed on. Imagine all who came after doing the same. What would that Africa be now?
You can download the Poisonwood Bible free by trying audible.com. Sign up for your free audiobook and a 30-day trial today at washingtech.com/book. My guest today is Tiffany Cross, editor of The Beat, DC's inclusive political pulse, and director at the Rabin Group. Previously, Tiffany was senior advisor for the National Education Association and its 3 million members. Before joining NEA, Tiffany served as the manager of news and public affairs and a liaison to the executive branch for Black Entertainment Television BET networks. Her work at BET included coordinating with the Democratic National Convention and Republican National Convention in 2008, executing the network's participation in the 2008 presidential election, brand enhancement for the network, and advising on BET's political and social agenda. Tiffany's broad experience includes guest booking for CNN's Reliable Sources with Howard Kurtz, covering Capitol Hill for Late Edition with Wolf Blitzer, and working as an associate producer for Capital Gang. She was also a former producer at America's Most Wanted and director of communications for Brilliant Corners Research and Strategies, where she worked on the Obama for America presidential campaign and secured high-level visibility for company president Cornell Belcher. Please welcome Tiffany Cross. Tiffany, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Joe, for having me. Very excited to participate today.
So you have such an interesting background, but I'm going to let you tell it. How did you start out in your career and what brought you to D.C.?
Okay, so I started out in my career. I was doing local radio in Atlanta, Georgia, the Frank Ski Morning Show. I was just out of Clark Atlanta University, and I got the opportunity to deliver the morning news on the number one urban station in Atlanta. And at that time, in my young years, I think I was 20 years old, I thought I had made it. I thought, as long as I can keep this job doing the morning news for this radio station, I will be fine. And I hope one day that this job pays me enough, I might be able to buy a little Toyota Camry or something. Please, Lord Jesus, let this work out. And I'm so grateful that God had something greater in mind for me than I did for myself, because in doing that job, I connected with a gentleman who was a hiring manager at CNN, and he offered me the opportunity to come interview for one of their entry-level programs called the Video Journalist Program, which I did. I got the job, and I loved it. I would work 7 days a week. I would show up on days I didn't have to work. I was happy to rip scripts, do research, whatever I could do that participated in the news gathering process. I was so eager to do it. And then they talked to me about a position that was becoming available in Washington, D.C., in the D.C. Bureau that would work on CNN's morning shows, which at the time was Capital Gang with Bob Novak, Reliable Sources with Howard Kurtz, and Late Edition with Wolf Blitzer. And I always wanted to be, when I was in high school, in my mind, I knew at some point I wanted to be Murphy Brown. I wanted to have a little condo in Georgetown and live just like Murphy Brown did. So when I got this job to come to D.C., that's what I thought I was going to be, a little brown Murphy Brown. And I came to D.C. as a associate producer for the weekend shows for CNN, and I was just absolutely delighted. And then from there, my career took about 18 different turns, but it was a fascinating journey that I wouldn't trade for the world.
So when you got here, what was the transition like? Did you know anyone when you got here?
I didn't know a soul, Joe. I got off the plane with a suitcase and a dream. I didn't even have a place to stay. And CNN said that they would put me up in a hotel for 2 weeks while I found a place to stay. And I thought that was the coolest thing of them, that they would, not only would they relocate me here, but they're going to give me a whole 2 weeks to find a place. I mean, what we don't know, you know? And so I was here. I didn't know anything about Maryland, D.C., Virginia. It was my first time here. The only other time I had been here was for my interview. And just thankfully, I landed on my feet okay. I ended up moving to Silver Spring, but the transition was challenging, but in a very good way. It was very positive. I think D.C. is very unique to other cities, particularly even major cities. So Atlanta is, for all intents and purposes, a major city. However, what I found to be true, what I noticed the most in my transition coming from Atlanta to D.C. was the standards for success were vastly different. In Atlanta, if you are a 30-something marketing exec, you are considered a success. In DC, that is the baseline. Having an undergraduate degree is the baseline. In DC, if you're a 30-something CFO who works the London markets, who speaks 3 languages, then maybe you are a success. Maybe you are considered somebody who's accomplished. So it's fascinating in that way. On one hand, it never gives you the opportunity to rest on your laurels. You're always trying to better yourself intellectually, physically, professionally. And on the other hand, I mean, you never rest on your laurels, which is, sometimes exhausting. Never feeling a sense of accomplishment. Every time you get to a point where you feel like, yes, I made it, something comes along, particularly as you know, in technology, things are always changing. Policy is always changing. Administrations are always changing. So there's always ups and downs and challenges, but that's definitely by far the biggest thing I noticed are what I considered successful it changed completely once I came to DC.
Yeah, we moved here about 12 years ago, and I'm from New York. So when we moved to the suburbs of Virginia, and for a long time, I don't know how long it took me to get used to this driving. It's such a culture shock to have to drive. I think people take it for granted, but it really changes everything. I hated the suburbs.
I didn't think about that with you coming from New York.
I hated it. You live downtown?
I do, but I lived in Silver Spring for 17 years. So my life has changed, Joe. I walk to work. I walk everywhere. I walk at least 1.5 miles a day.
Yeah, see, that's the way to do it.
Well, I will tell you, though, DC gets very cold. There's the ice storms. It's raining some days. Yeah. So there are those days where I do miss just hopping in my car. Mm-hmm. But I love living in the city. And I think DC is one of those very scenic cities. It's beautiful all year round. In the winter, spring, summer, and fall, this city has a gorgeous skyline, gorgeous buildings, rich in culture. I love it here. I love being in the city. Yeah, I don't mean to pour salt on your wound, Joe, but
no, it's really changed a lot over the last 12 years. There's a lot of nice more cultural activities, local artists, local performers, not just the National Smithsonian Museums, which are always great, but now there's a lot of local art galleries that you wouldn't think of. There are
Definitely.
Local musicians. So, I'm falling in love day by day.
Even the dining, the dining.
And I saw Bon Appetit that DC beat New York in Bon Appetit's ranking of restaurant cities.
I could believe it.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that, though? This is your home now, and that was your home. So where would you rank DC or New York in terms of dining?
It's been so long since I've gone to restaurants in New York, so I'm going to have to go with DC and but the DC area, because I haven't, honestly, I haven't had a chance to check out as many DC restaurants as I've wanted to, but we've gone to a lot of Virginia restaurants, which are kind of off the beaten path, but there are a lot of fantastic restaurants like Trummer's on Main and Clifton, which we really love. A few others in Arlington and Alexandria. But yeah, the place is growing on me. The commuting is tough.
I bet. Yeah.
Metro is terrible. It's, getting out from here and trying to get, an hour and a half. It's so nice during the holidays because it takes 34 minutes to get downtown. Normally it's an hour and a half sitting in traffic.
Oh, God.
But,
don't remind me.
And then the competitiveness, you're absolutely right. The other thing about coming from New York was like, I'm from New York. There ain't nothing gonna, but folks are competitive here. So that was, I wouldn't say it's a shock, but it's a different type of competition, because there it's all about the hustle, and it's about the hustle here too. But if you say the wrong thing to someone, if it just sounds wrong in their ear in DC, it's just kind of a weird place.
This is what I think about DC, and maybe this is true everywhere. I've lived most of my adult life in DC. I say in DC that people are most of the people are gangsters, and you're either a hip hop gangster or you're a Sicilian gangster, and you can say the wrong thing to someone in DC, and they can still smile and be as pleasant and polite. Yeah. You don't recognize your enemies all the time. So you can walk away and not even know that you've offended someone or run afoul of someone because they're Sicilian. The hip hop gangsters will let you know right then and there you have made a misstep. Right. And they will put the gun in your mouth and talk noise while they're doing it. Yeah.
That's absolutely.
I think I always prefer to deal with a hip hop gangster. So at least I know where I stand and I can make amends.
Yeah, exactly. People will smile in your face here. They really will.
Yeah. But it's kind of like a dignified way of fighting here, because you hear on the Hill, on Capitol Hill all day long, people will say, oh, my good friend, Congressman so-and-so from across the aisle. And then they, commits to berate them for the next 20 minutes. I mean, we can see that now with, Senator Sessions' hearing. Like, there are people who are just who stand up and say, I've known the senator for X amount of years, and then they go in and say why he's the most horrible pick for attorney general, but he's still their good friend from across the aisle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very duplicitous.
Yes, definitely.
And now how did you adjust once you got here and getting outside your comfort zone and start building your network? Were there, how did you make those initial contacts? Were they cold calls? Did you just reach out to folks through CNN?
No, it was actually a lot more organic, and I adjusted very quickly because I had no choice. So I started working at CNN on weekend shows, and so for the first time in my life, I was interfacing with members of Congress, senators. Like Senator John McCain was one of the first people I met. And just by virtue of working at CNN, I was getting invites. At that time, the Bush administration was just coming into office. So people were hosting welcome receptions for Condoleezza Rice and for different members of the Bush cabinet. And I would get on these invites and get to go. And so I met a lot of people that way. But I was definitely out of my element in those rooms at first. And I had to learn to be comfortable because for so long, I felt like people were doing me the favor of letting me work all the time. And I was so appreciative and grateful for the opportunity. And I was so appreciative and grateful for being in those rooms. And so I projected that. And it took me a while to understand that you've earned a place at this table and you've earned a place in this room and, conduct yourself accordingly. So it was definitely a learning curve, but I think that's okay and normal for young people to have. In terms of connecting with my peers, because these were all people who were professionally anyway superior to me. So in terms of connecting with my contemporaries and my peers, I did a lot of community service and social justice and civil rights work. So I joined the National Council of Negro Women. At that time, Dr. Haidt was still alive, and we were able to shepherd her legacy into the millennium. So we were actually called the Millennial Section. And so it was a ton of us who, there were young staffers on the Hill. We worked with the Urban League. We worked with some of the Greek organizations. We were always hosting things, professional development courses. And just so organically, you started to meet people who were literally, 17 years ago, answering phones on the Hill. And today, these are members of Congress, chiefs of staff. Some are political pundits who you see on television all the time. Some have gone on to write books. Some have gone on to make millions in the private sector. So I didn't chart these people out to build this network looking at what they might do. It was just an organic connection of being conscious and woke, as the young people say now, and caring about what was happening in our community and wanting to make an impact on our immediate community, our immediate surroundings, but also impacting federal policy and legislation that we would work on together. So, I would say it was an organic process of building that network, and they're still friends today.
So now, what are kind of your key takeaways? If you had some advice for folks who may be new to DC, or someone who's been here for a while and just slower to break out of their shell, what advice would you have for them to help them build their presence here in Washington?
Sure. I think the first thing I would say is show up to the table with an offer and not an ask. It's very challenging. DC can be somewhat of a transactional city. It's definitely a transient city. People are here for a few years and they go on someplace else. And so sometimes people meet you and their immediate thought is, how can this person help me? And not, how can I help this person? I think if you have a truly giving spirit, there's room for all of us to succeed. And it's okay to be, competitive. It's not okay to undercut somebody or to be nasty. So I think show up with a good spirit and offer yourself. I never start a meeting out by saying, here's what I need. I try to listen more than I speak and ask the other people, what are your needs and how can I help you? And I think people, and there is no quid pro quo. I was fortunate enough to have maybe over 100 people influence my career or just reach out and help me at a time where they had nothing to gain from it, other than they were just trying to give a young woman a correct path. And I truly appreciate that. And so I've tried to do that for other young people here. And so I would say when people are out meeting people, don't immediately size people up. Just look at, how can I help you and how can I be of service? And, if you give and give and give, it will definitely come back to you. The second thing I would recommend for anybody listening, really, is to be informed. No matter, I meet so many people who they want to do television, they want to be on TV, and they want to talk about politics. And I always ask people, well, what have you done to warrant? Who are you that you deserve this platform? Have you worked in politics? And people will reference, people who they like. For example, my colleague Jamal Simmons. People say, well, Jamal does it. And I'm like, well, Jamal has worked in politics for 20 years. He didn't do it because he wanted to get on television. He did it because he loved politics. And as a result of this work, he landed on television. So I would say be good at whatever it is that you're doing. And the last thing I would say is for everyone listening, my plea for 2017 is for people to turn off cable news and get a newspaper subscription. I think in DC, it's a very, cocktail reception, intellectual type town. And so we get used to meeting people, and we assume, of course, you read the op-ed page of the Journal today. And of course, you read Maureen Dowd and Tom Friedman, and we can talk about this. But there are so many people outside of this space who literally do not have a newspaper subscription or haven't read a newspaper in years. And I think anywhere, wherever you live, whatever you do, you have a responsibility to know what's going on in this country. And cable news will give you the headline and not the substance. So there's nothing like consuming information. If you're old fashioned, you can get the print paper delivered to you, or you can download. Every reputable newspaper has an app that is constantly being updated that people can download information right at your fingertips. So I really hope, if nothing else, people take that away. And
it also supports the newspapers. I mean, journalism is, kind of almost seems like our last hope at the moment. So, absolutely. So I have I get the post on the week. I get the weekend post, and I have the app, and I'll never get rid of it. And sometimes the newspaper just sits on the driveway, and I don't even pick it up, and that's fine. If I continue to read my news on the app, that's fine. If that paper's out there, because I know that I'm supporting the journalism. Right. Exactly. So the fact that I don't actually read the physical paper doesn't bother me as much. Exactly. Although I do want my kids to see me reading the paper. So there's that instead of always looking at my phone. But so tell us about The Beat and what you're working on with The Beat. I subscribe to the newsletter, but tell us what's going on with The Beat.
Sure. So The Beat, Joe, I will tell you, is my heartbeat. It is just my passion project. I'm super excited about it. The Beat, we are more than just a newsletter or a tip sheet. We're actually a platform, and we capture the politics, policy, and social comings and goings of people of color in the Beltway. So there are a ton of rags that cover politics in DC, and there are innumerable tip sheets that people get on, and I have been a frequent subscriber of most of them for the 17 years that I've been here, and I've seen them come, I've seen them go, I've seen some of them last and survive and develop in the platforms that I don't think people envisioned 15 years ago. But my frustration with all of them is they frequently ignore people of color. And I don't think it's intentional. I think it's simply because it's not on their radar. So there are people of color who have seats at these tables, and they're fighting the hard battles, and they go unnoticed and uncelebrated by most of these outlets. And again, I don't think that's intentional, but I think most of us got tired for asking for a seat at that table, and we just decided to create our own. So Robert Rabin, who's a very well-known progressive here in DC, who runs the Rabin Group, had been lamenting about this, along with many others, about why there is no outlet that covers the types of things that we do. And so he and I collaborated to form The Beat, not only to capture our politics and policy and our comings and goings, but as you well know, a lot of these publications can launch careers. I mean, in DC, access is a really big deal. And so if you read in Political Playbook every day about the 5 people who are not of color who are mentioned frequently, then you may have the disillusion that these are the only 5 people who you can go to. And we all know that's not true. We all know that there are people who look like you and me who are at these tables having these conversations, fighting these hard battles, gaining some wins. And again, they don't get press coverage. So the Beats, we're a platform. We have a digital tip sheet that publishes every Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. If people would like to sign up, they can visit our website at thebeatdc.com. They can see our past issues on there, and our subscription link is there as well. And I'll give you, if I may, I'll give you one quick example on why it's so important for an outlet like ours to exist. So President Obama hosted a party at the White House in November, and people joked that it was the blackest night at the White House. There were celebrities there. There were members of Congress there. There were influencers there, members of the media there.
Right. I saw the Ta-Nehisi Coates article.
Right, exactly. And Dave Chappelle did a whole monologue about it on Saturday Night Live. So this was the talk of the town. Everybody's talking about this because there were so many people of color at the White House. They had chicken that was pre-coated in hot sauce. I mean, this was the blackest night at the White House. So people are there, they're partying, people won't leave. The next day, one of the well-known DC Rags political playbook came out. And they may have had a sentence about it, or they may not. But it wasn't anything to capture truly what happened that evening, whereas it was our main story in the Beat. And we talked about all the people who were there. So in addition to the politics and policy, we do have fun and highlight some of the social comings and goings that our people care about and attend and deserve to be highlighted as well.
Right.
So I just remember that day. I remember reading all the rags and just waiting to see what I missed. Like they're going to name people who were there that I didn't, or they were going to, catch something about the menu that I missed. And I was shocked that not a single outlet the immediate day after gave the extensive coverage to that event that we did. And it just let me know that we have an audience for this type of information, and we're growing rapidly. We're averaging around 700 new subscribers a month.
Wow.
So yeah, people are hungry for this kind of information, and people feel appreciated that we are now highlighting some of the great work that people like us are doing.
That's fantastic growth, and you're going to be able to springboard off that because people, I know, and we were talking about earlier, when you first get here, even if you've been here for a while, it's still kind of easy to feel isolated, not really know what's going on in people who are similarly situated or people who have interesting ideas. Some people just want to know what folks who look like them are doing, what they're active in, and thus far there's been no resource for that. So that's why I love the Beat so much, and I read it every single day.
Awesome.
Are you trolling my clicks?
No, I'm not trolling your click. I might start though. I might start, Joe, but no, I'm not trolling your clicks. I mean, there are thousands of clicks to go through, but I can definitely search Joe Miller. So
yeah, because there were a couple of things that I included in the news that I got from the Beat that I didn't see on other sites. So
awesome. That is why we exist, and I love to hear that. And if there are things that people want to send me that are relevant to policy or politics happening in the Beltway, they can email us at info@thebeatdc.com. Because I'm, one person managing all this news gathering. So I can't, there's some things that I'm going to miss. So I welcome people to send information to us at that email address. It's actually helpful.
Well, the focus of this podcast is tech policy, but it also focuses on helping tech policy professionals be more productive and find meaning and purpose in their work, the Beat being one example of that. Tell us, what are some other habits, tactics, and apps that you implement to come as close as possible to reaching your potential?
So I will start with habits. One habit that I learned from my grandmother is I try to get up early. If I'm still asleep past 6 a.m., then it's considered sleeping in. So I do try to start my morning early. I typically read anywhere between 8 to 10 papers before the sun comes up because I'm curating content. I read blogs, people's social media accounts, and get a good handle on what's happening in and around the Beltway. And I would I don't expect people to read 10 papers, but I would encourage, that's always a good habit. The early bird gets the worm. It's an old saying, but I found it to be true. And it's consistent with what a lot of other leaders do. Tactics, I would say the thing that I am least looking forward to doing that day, I make it the first thing that I do that day, just to get it out of the way. If I've got expense reports, I'm going to do that first thing. If I've got a call to someone that I know is not going to be pleasant, I'm going to hurry up and get that out of the way. If I got corrections to run, then I'm going to do that first thing, get it off my plate. I found that when you push things to the end, it changes my whole entire day, because I'm, all day I'm looking forward to the thing that I don't want to do. So it makes me sluggish. I'm just not as productive. So I try to get that out the way. And one thing that I think, particularly women, but maybe everybody, a tactic that I think we all have to employ, because there's so much on our plate all the time. And, with technology being what it is, there really is no off time. We're always attached to our devices. Most of us in the Beltway are even double fisted with 2 phones in our hands at all times. So one thing that I've tried to do, there are times when I'm on a deadline and I've got a ton of things to do, and it might be 1 or 2 o'clock and I notice that I haven't eaten yet. And I used to plow through because I didn't even have time to chew. I said, let me just keep working. And what I noticed is I would get sluggish. I wasn't as productive. I was tired. And if I just stopped for 30 minutes and just consume some energy, your body needs food to function. So if I just stop and eat apples and a peanut butter or a sandwich or something to give my body fuel to run on, that has certainly helped me be more productive and go about my day. So just take the extra 30 minutes and, give yourself a mental break and feed yourself. And that way you're more productive in the end. In terms of apps, I would say that apps that help me reach my goals and just things that I can't live without. Certainly all the news apps. Washington Post redid their app, I'd say about a year ago, which made it much easier to navigate. So I appreciate that. New York Times has a great feature on their app that you can save articles for later. So I appreciate that. iNews, obviously I love the Apple News. That kind of is a little intrusive, but it just caters to you. So it puts together news that it just knows that I would like based on my habits. So I do appreciate that. And then there's an app called Postmates. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it because I'm in the city and I literally do not have time to walk 2 or 3 blocks to grab something to eat. Postmates is an app that will bring me food from pretty much anywhere. If I have a taste for Peruvian chicken, I just log on to Postmates, I click what I want, and it's there typically within 30 minutes.
Wow.
And it can be a restaurant, it can be Cafe Milano, or it can be Sweet Green and a salad. I mean, it's like Uber for eating, which, of course there's Uber Eats, but I like Postmates because it's quick and reliable. And then one more app that I love as a single woman, living in a condo that often has challenges. There is an app called TaskRabbit. And TaskRabbit, I call my husband, because if I come home and the water isn't cutting on, I just call TaskRabbit and they send somebody to deal with it.
But why do you have to call your husband, though? All right, the show's over.
I mean, look, it could be my wife too, because if I need somebody to come hang some curtains, TaskRabbit does it. I'll call it whichever.
Yeah, clean it up.
It keeps my life functioning.
Yeah.
So TaskRabbit is just one of my favorite apps. I can't live without those apps. And of course, Twitter. I mean, I find it really interesting that Twitter has become a source for news. News breaks on Twitter, and there have been plenty of news stories that I find out about on Twitter long before I do in the papers or on CNN or MSNBC. So yes, Twitter is definitely very integral to what I do for a living.
Now, tell us the name of a book that you're recommending these days and why.
Oh, God, I have probably no less than 20 books. But I will say the book that I always recommend to people that I love so much that I buy it for people. It is a work of fiction, and it's called The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. And it is the most, I've read it maybe 5 times. It is a lyrical work of art. It's like reading a 500-page poem. It's just beautifully written. And it's a story about a white Christian evangelical family who moves to the Congo in the 60s during the reign of Lumumba. And they're going to teach the quote unquote savages how to live like good Christian folk. And what this story explores about American democracy, about family structure, about the strength and love of women, about mother-daughter relationships, about husband-wife relationships. I mean, it just takes you emotionally to places that I didn't expect reading the book. But it's such a great piece of work that every time I read it, it feels like the first time. It's just an amazing book. Sorry, I don't have a more intellectual biography.
I thought, hey, that was pretty good. And I'll link to it in the show notes so folks can find it.
Oh, it's just my favorite. You know how Oprah used to buy copies of The Color Purple for people just because you couldn't work for her if you haven't read this book. That's how I feel about the Poisonwood Bible. I want to talk about it and then I want to talk about it some more. I'm a part of a book club called Overbooked because we're a bunch of women who are always overbooked. And the joke is that I'm always talking about Poisonwood Bible. Anytime anyone asks me a question about a book, everybody rolls their eyes like, oh, Tiffany's going to talk about Poisonwood Bible again. But I just love it. It's just that great a book. It's great.
Yeah. There's always
what are you, can I ask you what your favorite, I'm always curious about. I love that question. What is your favorite book?
Hold on. I have to think for a second.
Okay.
I would say, there's a few that have changed. One of them that changed my life probably about 11 years ago was a book by Dan Pink called Right Brain, Left Brain, and How Creatives Are Going to Rule the Future. I forget the exact title.
I remember that book. I didn't read it, but I remember it. Yeah,
that book kind of opened a door because he included in there a bunch of other books to read, like A Man's Search for Meaning, Martin Seligman's Authentic Happiness, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's Flow, and all these different books that talk about positive psychology and how you think about your success as being fixed or as growing over time. So it also brought me to Carol Dweck's Mindset. So that book, I think Daniel Pink's book several years ago is kind of what opened the door for me. That was a good one.
Would you say that you're more left brain or right brain?
I think it's, I can be, which one is right is the creative side? So I don't even remember which one. Okay. So right is the creative. So I think when I'm left brain when I have to be. So I'm left brain when I had to do FCC filings and, right. Although it calls upon the creative side, but a lot of it is, knowing when they're due and making sure that they're on time and, rules of procedure and things like that. I think I'm more left brain. But when it comes to, this podcast and writing for the podcast and thinking about ways to, make the content interesting, and, the interpersonal skills with the interviews and the, trying to make the podcast something that people can actually use. I think that really calls on the right brain. But I'm glad you're the first person to ask me that question on the show. Nobody else cares about any books I read. No, I'm just But yeah, so I would say probably Dan Pink, and I would say I'm probably more on because originally I was a musician, and then I decided to become a lawyer, and so
really?
Now, yeah, so now
what kind of musician? That's the story right there. What kind of musician?
Yeah, no, I went to the Fame School in New York. I went to LaGuardia and took piano, got in on piano, and
oh my gosh,
was a music major there. But then
Did you know Leroy?
Yeah, right. Remember Leroy?
I think anybody born after 1980 probably has no idea what we're talking about.
It was interesting though, because people think, when they see on TV, they figure that it's not really like that. I have to say, LaGuardia was a lot like Fame. It wasn't so choreographed, but there would be people performing in the cafeteria and things like that. Just
Really?
Yeah, it was probably the greatest 4 years of my life. College was fun but it was, a lot of, how college is. But LaGuardia was fun because of the people I was around. And a lot of those folks are still very dear friends of mine to this day. And I wouldn't change. I wouldn't give up that opportunity. I wouldn't take back that opportunity for anything in the world. It was really a wonderful, wonderful place.
You ought to post pictures or video.
You mean on the site?
Yeah.
I know. That's what I'm doing. But, you know how these things, it takes a while to grow your audience and things like that, but it's coming along.
I bet if you posted a video of you and your time at Fame.
I don't have it. I don't have a video.
Oh.
It wasn't like today.
I know, it's true. Yeah. It wasn't like people had iPhones walking around. That's true.
So it's all in the memory. But anyway, Tiffany, thanks again for joining me. Do you have any final ideas you'd like to leave with the audience before we close? And I know you mentioned the email list for folks to sign up, but where else can folks find you online?
So we're on Twitter. People can follow us at the Beat DC on Twitter. And obviously our website, thebeatdc.com. And that's where people can subscribe. Once they go to the website, they'll literally be on the menu bar to subscribe. People click that and they can put in their information and they will start to get the tip sheet every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I would say for final thoughts, I think the next 4 years are going to be quite eventful, and that all of us as citizens of this country are going to have to remain vigilant about policy coming out of this administration. And so even if people don't sign up for the Beat, which I hope they do, I hope that people pay close attention, read the papers, not pay so much attention to what's being said on MSNBC and CNN and Fox and whatever other talk radio or people who are on opposite ends of the spectrum with the loudest microphones, but really pay attention to what's happening, because it's not only your right as citizens, but it's your responsibility. And regardless of how you feel about this president, I think the greater good is depending on us to pay attention. And I think the powerful few are depending on us to not pay attention.
Right.
So I hope people take that responsibility very seriously.
And they've shown their skill at manipulating the media. So not that they need to be enemies, but what we've seen up until now is really sort of a manipulation of the messaging and the timing of the messaging. And I think that's great advice. I think just shutting that stuff off, really, I would recommend it even, under Obama, just shutting that stuff off so you can develop your capacity to think for yourself, even if you've been 20, 30 years and, you think you are already an independent thinker, you'd be surprised how much you're not.
Yeah. And you'd be surprised how many informed and educated people don't know how government works. And there are people who don't know the difference between their federal government and their state government and their local government. That was one of the things that I made about some of the young people who were out front on the Black Lives Matter movement. And it's like, you're protesting presidential candidates. I'm not going to fault you. But do you know who your own state's attorney is? Do you know who your own mayor is? Did you know that the sheriff in your town was an elected position? Were you a part of that process? So it's fine to raise a stink around federal policy. We depend on younger people to do that. But first, be informed and engaged. And hashtag activism is not activism all the time.
Yeah,
sometimes
really
it takes more than being on Twitter. And you have to get out there and be informed and know what you're talking about to make a real impact.
And there's a tremendous opportunity now for folks to be involved on the local level. And I would encourage everyone to do so.
Definitely.
You've been listening to Tiffany Cross, managing editor and curator of The Beat. Can I say that? I want to say that again. The Beat.
I like that hard T, The Beat.
Tiffany, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Joe. This was great.
That concludes episode 73 of the podcast. Thanks so much to all of you for listening. If you like what we do here, we'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment and head over to iTunes and give it a review. It helps others know what they can expect from the show and helps us out tremendously. Thanks again to all of you for listening, and I'll see you back here next week. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Washing Tech Policy Podcast. You've been briefed.